Hey, everybody. Welcome to a very exciting, very special Ask the Trainer featuring one of the most amazing third-party developers and artists and designers that I've ever had the pleasure to meet and talk to. And Chris Schmidt, welcome.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, man.
Hey, Chris.
Hi,
nice
everybody.
to have you here.
Yes, it's good to be back. I'm excited.
Yay.
So we got a lot to show off today. You have been so busy helping us out with capsules in Cinema 4D.
Yes, we have. Yeah, Rocket Lasso has been working directly with Maxon to give feedback on the entire Neutron nodes workflow, and we've been developing capsules that are shipping along with the Maxon subscriptions. So it's been really excited to be building out these different tools, and I'm really excited to show them off.
Before we jump to that content, though, there's a couple of things that we always mention at the top of the show. Let's see. I got to share my screen. All right, if I can remember, present, share screen. Everyone's listening to me read buttons out loud. How exciting is that?
And that's super exciting. That's what we do as trainers.
So let's see, we'll get there. And we'll get there also. So today's show, all of our shows are available on the Maxon Training Team YouTube page. Make sure that you guys check that out. Also, all of our shows you can find on the Maxon events page under the news navigation here. So we got a lot of exciting and really cool stuff coming up. Make sure you check this out.
I think you're still not sharing here.
Oh, really? Let's go back over here. Let's do this again. How is this?
There you go.
Okay.
Awesome.
This is perfect.
Here we go. So Maxon Training Team YouTube page with all of our recordings. And here is our events page on maxon.net under news, where you can find that. And because you are here with us today, like we do every time, you can get yourself a free shirt. What is the code for
The
this?
code is Universe for Editors.
Universe.
All capitalized.
Chat.
Thank you, Ellie. Thanks, Jonas. Is that like this? Lowercase?
I think it's all capitalized.
Yeah. Universe. Oops. For. Nothing is cooler than typing live.
Typing
what's cooler?
live.
Coding
Yeah.
live is the
buttons.
most exciting.
Yeah, here you go. Check out the stuff. Let's see. I think you do have to pay for shipping and handling, but it is it's still not much. And make sure that you check out rocketlasso.com to check out all of the plugins and tutorials and all the additional community links there for Rocket Lasso. You, Chris, you guys have a oh gosh, I'm totally spacing it on the name of the channel where people can join and chat with you.
The
And
Slack channel. The
thank
Rocket
you.
Lasso
Thank you. Yeah. So there's a Rocket Lasso Slack channel and their YouTube page. So make sure that you guys get in there and check that stuff out. I have to stop sharing now. I get so nervous when I'm sharing my screen. Let's see. Did I miss anything, you guys?
I think you didn't.
I think we're good.
Yeah.
So, okay. I don't know, a couple days ago, Chris, I was in my asset browser. Jonas, Ellie, maybe you guys saw this too. And I love going in and clicking on new content because there's always new stuff coming out. Our asset browser content team and Chris and everyone else we work with has just been doing just cranking stuff out. But I saw something really, really cool. I got to mention it. It's the swirl.
Yes, the new swirl.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we got a whole collection of things that we can talk about. Am I taking control here at this point?
Yes, you have the screen, Chris.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody. So I'm going to assume that most people don't use too much in the way of the node system right now. So we're going to start kind of from that baseline. And as Aaron was just saying, there are essentially monthly drops from Maxon and the asset team where there's like new materials coming out, lots of stuff for Redshift, new HDRs. The HDRs all got a little bit more like unified where they have the same balance of light and they've gotten more organized, and just new content coming out all the time with additional models, etc. But along with those, Rocket Lasso has been working directly with Maxon, and we've been developing some tools. And these are almost like full-blown plugins, or we've been trying to build them sort of like you would have the primitives inside of Cinema. So some of these primitives are like proper primitive objects. I'll be giving you a staircase, but also we have things like deformers and some spline modifiers. So we're going to cover a bunch of them because we have made quite a few. Now, the important thing to note is that when you're a Maxon subscriber, so if you have Cinema 4D subscription, or if you have the Maxon 1 subscription, that's where you get access to these. So if you have those, you should be able to move into your asset browser. And especially if you have Maxon 1, you'll see all of them. But the easy thing to do is move into your Cinema 4D. And here I am in 2023.1.3, which is the newest. And you've got your asset browser over here. So hopefully you're familiar at least a little bit with that. But if you search for the word Rocket Lasso, then we have all of the tools and example files that we've made. They're tagged this way. Oh, and it looks like Donovan might have updated that so it properly has Rocket Lasso in it. So down here, you can see we've got these new node operators, but these are the new tools that we've been working on. And up here is a bunch of different example files. So if you search Rocket Lasso, whatever you see there, that's what you've got access to. So let's cover a bunch of these. I'm going to fly through them very quickly. Some of these earlier ones, and then we'll slow down and focus on some of the newer ones with more detail. But as Darren said, why don't we start with the newest one? And this only came out like a week ago, and it is the swirl modifier. So what is the swirl modifier? Well, it is a way, and I'll start this completely from scratch. I'll make a new piece of geometry and simple plane. Let's subdivide this a bunch of times and drag our swirl into our object manager. So when it comes to capsules, oftentimes these are tools that are essentially nodes inside of Neutron, inside of the new awesome node stuff, but you can drag them into the object manager and use them as new objects or modifiers, etc. So taking the swirl modifier and dropping it as a child of the plane, instantly you're going to see that we've got essentially a new deformer type. Any geometry that we feed this in, including splines, you can now begin to deform that geometry. If I hit NA, we can see the smooth out lay or the smooth out display, turn on SSAO, just so we see a little bit of shadowing on there. So what is swirl doing? Well, we've got a bunch of settings here, hopefully pretty straightforward and intuitive, where we control exactly the way we are placing this deformation. Now, as of right now, we can't tie into fields with capsules. So this is just based on a radius. So I can increase or decrease that radius. It might be cool to make a quick material here. And if anybody in the chat or if any of my fellow hosts here have any questions, like feel free to jump in. But I'm going to make a, what am I looking for? Checkerboard, simple checkerboard. Material applied. Let's calm that down just a bit. We'll drop it to 5 by 5. Okay, cool. Now we can see the pattern going. So what is the swirl doing? Well, we're actually deforming the geometry in a bunch of really cool ways. So I showed you the radius a little bit, but one of the main ones is just the swirl percentage. So we can swirl that one direction or the other, and that's unclamped. So you can keep going further and further and further. Of course, like any deformer, we could push it so far that it starts to explode. And then we've got additional settings like the height. So we can deform this upward or downward and start making a really cool vortex. Let me pull the material off. Now you can see we get this vortex effect.
I'm having flashbacks from like 70s artwork.
Yes. So yeah, we get this, just really fun, quick, easy, intuitive deformation. Now, wherever we move this, it's going to be moving that deformation. So you see how you can move it around, deform the geometry as we go. You can even tilt it. So I can actually bend this off the axis. So of course that could be keyframed, moved around however you want. Moving back inside the swirl, we can spin that as many times as we want, keep on twisting it further and further. We could increase the resolution of our plane a bit here, jump it up a little more subdivided. Now, moving on, we've got this pull setting. To show that, I'll get rid of all the height. And if we play with the pull, we can actually start pulling the geometry towards the center, or we can even do the opposite and start sort of inflating it out. So if you combine that with, let's say, no swirl, and let me get rid of, let's do 0 swirl and 0 ridge height, you'll see that we end up with this perfectly, there's nothing happening. And now I could just pull. So it's almost like we get a black hole effect as well. But you could do the opposite and get a bulging effect, and then leaving everything zeroed out. We could also get a simple height effect as well, pulling in and out. And then they all start combining to make the cool vortexes and black hole effects all over the place.
Oh, man.
That's cool.
So let's zero out a couple things. Let's put some of this ridge height back in and actually talk about the ridge height. This ridge height was actually something that came significantly later in the development of this tool. And the importance here was, if you start deforming a piece of geometry and there's no height to it, if I turn off my polygons, it doesn't even look like anything's deforming, even though it is swirling around. Now, obviously, you'd see the material swirl around, but without that, what really makes it look cool is some sort of imperfections on the surface. So we built into it this ridge height concept. So let me just show you what that's actually doing. That is just automatically making these lovely little bumps. So right now there's 3 of them, and they fade out from the center point. And I gotta add as many of those as I want, depending on the resolution of your mesh that you're deforming. And we can pull back on those. We can make those, positive. We can make them negative. And while we're here, it might be nice to jump into the advanced tab. We've also got this inner radius and a fade. And just because of the resolution of the mesh, you're going to see that we get it gets a little jagged in the middle just because there aren't enough polygons to deform there. So a good way around that is adding in a little bit of this inner radius or this fall off. So it just kind of smoothly, blends that through. So it's a good way of sort of dealing with that issue. Jumping back to the main tab, let's go and put some swirl in there. And now you'll see we actually have geometry that can visually bend around. And even with no material, just looking at the geometry, we have a cool looking swirl. Now, where this gets exciting is we've also got the rate. Well, we've got an offset. That's a manual version, but the fun one is the rate. So if I type in 90, over the course of 1 second, it's going to rotate automatically 90 degrees. So what's actually spinning here is not the swirl, but it's these ridges, and that's how you get the effect.
Oh my God, dude! Every time, every time you release a new tool or utility, I'm just like, I'm blown away because those ridges. It takes something that's cool and interesting nonetheless, and it just takes it to another level.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
The ridges were really important. Like up until that point, while we were developing the tool, I was just putting like some random, I would put honestly a different deformer beforehand. So I do like a displacer with some random noise, and it would imply the swirl, but then eventually it's like, wait a minute, I know how to make like really clean swirls. So yeah, we get those set up really nice and clean. Something that's pretty common for me to do here, let's get rid of the height, is just unless you're going to have like absolutely perfect geometry, you'll still see that these get a little bit jittery here. So a usual workflow for me would be grabbing a regular smoothing deformer, drop that in, and then you see it's going to really clean that up. Of course, if you could put a subdivision surface after the fact, etc. But that layers up really nicely. Let that swirl down. And just to cover all the parameters, because why not? Let's add some height onto here. And if I move into advanced, besides that inner radius and the fade, all these other settings are just kind of biases. It's where is the effect going to get applied? And it's more like, is it applying on the outside of the radius or the inside of the radius, or the inside and the outside? So we've got this. Well, let's look at the height bias, because you'll see it very clearly there. So if I grab the bias here, you see I'm biasing towards the outside by pushing it out, and I'm biasing it towards the inside if I pull it in. So with very little smooth there, you're going to see it's very, very strictly on one side or the other. But as I pull this out, as I add additional smooth in here, it's actually turning it more into an S curve. So it's easing in and easing out. So yeah, you can take that same concept and now apply it to the idea of like, oh, where's the swirl getting applied? It's very much here on the outside. Or I can say it's very much here influenced onto the inside. So it fades out near the edge. And the same thing applies to like, are the ridges sharper in the center, or are they going to be sharper on the outside? And the same, the bias of the shape of the ridge on the inside or outside. So for the most part, honestly, you don't even need to know what these do. You just wiggle them around until it's like, oh, that looks good, and then you just leave it there.
That's exactly what I did when I dropped into my scene. We got so we got a couple questions. First off, I'm so distracted by what's happening right now with the swirl modifier in here. I forgot what you did when you first added it. Is there any? Because John mentions that he dropped it into a scene, nothing's happening, and for some reason you can't see the settings. That can be a couple of different issues, not seeing the settings.
Well, if you are a Max on One subscriber, this is one of those bonus tools that comes along with that. So you be sure that you actually have Max on One, because if swirl is showing up and you don't have Max on One, then maybe somehow a bad version went in. But in general, if you search for swirl or Rocket Lasso and you grab this and drag it in, you should instantly be seeing that. This was also made with nodes from the newest version of Cinema, but even if it was broken, all the settings would still be there. So there could be something more technical there.
Here.
Yeah. So I don't know. That could be an issue specific to you, but yeah, I guess you can hit me up somewhere on social media. I could take a look at that example specifically.
And we got another question from Saika. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Multiple instances of swirl?
Yes, but think of this like if you're adding multiple copies of twist. If you put a twist on top of a twist, you can get some very crazy results, even just a bend on a bend. So if you use it carefully and you play, and some of this cool is this will work with scale. So if you hit scale, you can scale it up and down. But if I make a copy of it over there and I make if I make a duplicate, it's probably gonna look pretty crazy. Actually, it didn't break too much. But if I move it off to the side, you can see I get two different swirls, but it's got that same order of operations that everything in Cinema does, which means this one calculates first. It's moving the geometry into new locations. And then the second one is seeing that resulting geometry. So if I were to hit play here, like it's a pretty clean setup, but this first one's going to have a lot of influence on the second one, like a first bend would have on a second bend. So if I put these back to, let's go back to a lot more default type settings and see if we can get a little bit more interference going. So if I start intersecting, yeah, you see that, it actually works pretty well. I can get pretty close there. It's still working. You see, if I push further, they're going to start kind of crashing into each other and, kind of twisting in weird ways. It's working properly, but it's weird ways of combining things. But yeah, as long as you don't let them overlap each other too much, then it should work perfectly fine. I love when you get to like the edge of this. It's something like it even swirls that around as well. So yeah, super, super fun tool. And this was the one that we just released. We're trying to release something every month. So this was a fun one. I've actually had this idea in my head for a while of like, oh, what if there was some sort of swirl? So it's really fun to come up with an idea that feels like it's like a fundamental new type of deformer that's like, oh, I can easily think of reasons I would want to use that. So yeah, that is the swirl. If there's no more questions on swirl, I'd love to jump into some of the other ones that we've made.
I think you can. I think we can move on to another one. I'm not seeing any other questions unless Ellie, Jonas, you're seeing one that I'm missing.
So there's one question here. Is it compatible with older versions like R20 and 21? And I would say no, because no C nodes have been there, and this is based on C nodes.
Correct. All of these are entirely built with nodes, and I don't know. Let's see how dangerous this is. But I'm going to right-click on one of them and say edit asset as group. And you can, when you have this, you can actually go into the guts of it. And so here's that. It's like, okay, that doesn't look too bad. But each of these is a group. And inside of that group is more stuff happening. So if I go to the outer one, I think I can select all and right click and say ungroup nodes. Select all, say ungroup nodes.
Just a few.
No. That's all of them. So it's gonna be a mess now because I ain't grouped them. But this is the math that's actually going into making this one. And this is one of the simpler tools. So lots of nodes. Let's see how well that organizes. Yeah, if you hit L, you can automatically auto organize nodes. So it's better.
Can you keyframe that?
Yeah.
Dude, I'm almost seizing just looking at that network.
If I were to pull up the one we're working on right now, it's got to be 4 or 5 times the number of nodes.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, they're all over the place.
I can't wait. Bring it.
So yeah, let's jump into some of the other tools. So I'm trying to think of the things that are going to be most useful that can be kind of encapsulated into a single thing. So, we're good to go along with the word capsule. Oh, and by the way, there are a bunch of example files here. I'm not going to pull them all open. My computer doesn't like Redshift. It's something with me like having video calls while running Redshift. But there's a bunch. Let me make this bigger, and you'll see that there are
water cube one. Oh,
yeah. There's this. A cool little swirl there. I'm making ice cream model with it. This is what running with simulations. Oh, and then this one looks really cool, just showing off like the swirl and the push and the pull and the height. So yeah, those layer up really, really nicely. But let's jump into a new file and take a look at, why don't we jump back to the beginning? I'll keep this simple. We won't spend too long in here because this has existed for a while, but a lot of people in this chat might not even know that there are capsules to play around with. So the first one that we made, and this one's kind of an experiment. At some point, we're probably gonna go back and use our new knowledge and go back and improve this one. But it's a spline-based grid. And oftentimes in my own work, it's like, oh, I just need a grid or I need some cool graphic to drop and just have this be on the background or on the ground. But we tried to take the grid concept as far as we could and keep it simple. So the super basics are we have the number of cells. So you can say exactly how many cells that there are going to be on this grid. But where it starts getting fun is it's actually a 3-dimensional grid. So I can add, let me change this to per step. It's going to look a little cooler. So if I go to per step, now it's 10 cells and there are 400 units in between each one. But now I can start adding in cells on Y as well. And you get this full 3-dimensional grid going. So I can make a box grid out of it. And then, I could drop this one down to 0 now, and now we have it from a different orientation. So yeah, all of that works really well. We have the ability to say, right now we're seeing the entire grid, but we say, hey, don't show the full grid, show only the parts on the inside. We can also say only show the outside parts of it, which would look cooler if we have a 3-dimensional grid. But yeah, if you do this, you'd see that works. If I say outside, then now we only get this outer box covering it. So you can instantly see that there's a lot of different types of grid you can make with it. Pushing it even a little bit further than that, let's go back to full. We have several different modes. Right now we're in line mode. So this is one long line traveling across the entire thing. So I can change it over to the idea of a segment. So it's not going to look any visually different. But now every one of these tiny little segments has become its own independent segment inside of the spline. So if I start adding in some of this gap, you're going to see that we end up with these missing inner parts. So it's another way of adding to the grid. So yeah, looking pretty nice there.
That's a super cool thing and so easy to create.
Yes, and again, 3-dimensional. We can keep on adding some more into the depth. So very nice. I love grid. Yeah, I use it pretty often. And you start putting this in Cloner and layering them up, and either sweeping or layering these up with rendering lines out in Redshift. Like it's pretty fun, pretty quick.
If you make this, can you make this editable?
Yep, make it editable. It's just a spline. And you can treat it. It is a spline. So if I select it, you can see all different spline parts. So works as a spline. And you could, yeah. The last mode I wanted to show. Let me get rid of the gap. The last mode is we get these different types. I can jump it to box mode. Now, when you're in box mode, essentially it's filling each of these in as a full-on rectangle. But we have to tell the spline that it's a closed spline. So now that I've done that, we've got boxes. They don't look any different, but if we start adding in a bit of a gap, you're going to see that each one is its own standalone rectangle. So once you start taking these concepts, you start layering them up. Let's say that we change this one to a line, or I'm sorry, segment mode, and now you get those in-betweens. And then, we could make another grid and say, okay, we'll do that, but only give me the outside of it. And I want to scale the entire thing up bigger. You can see how you can start layering and layering these, getting really cool grid type layouts very quickly. Make another one of those, add a little bit more gap inside of it. So yeah, those get it's a straightforward tool, but it gives you easy functionality that would take a while to build otherwise. So yeah, grid, straightforward but fun.
That's one of the things that's been so impressive about the content that you've been creating for the capsule content and at Rocket Lasso is that you're just zeroing in on these things that are maybe a little more tedious than we'd like them to be in Cinema 4D, or just don't exist, right? Like the swirl. And
some things would be tough to make, but most things can be made in Cinema if you spend enough time. But it's like, well, do you want a half hour building a rig to do that, or you want the instant version?
Yeah. I mean, like that, like the spline grid, like all the spline capsules. I mean, that would have taken more time than I'd like to spend assembling a whole bunch of primitives. And now we have the capsule. It's just drag and drop. It's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, man. We'll do this one very quickly because I talked about this a bunch in like my What's New video, but this was the second one we ever made. And it is a graph tool. And it's all essentially fake data. But the idea is you can make a bunch of different types of graphs. So here's a bar graph. Here's a line graph. You have to set this to open. And then we can switch this to a step graph. I guess that one's also open. So yeah, a bunch of different graphs all built into one. I personally like the look of the bar graph a lot. And then we've got the pie graph. So we'll talk about that briefly. But the main thing is you can determine the look of your graph, like where we pivot from, how tall it is, how wide it is. We can add rounding onto these, which can look cool. But the super important variable here is our ability to manipulate the data. So you could manually type in different variables, but this is currently based on noise. We could say random, and you can also determine it via a spline shape. So easy ways for you to input it how you directly want to. But noise is the fancy one. It's one of the tools designed around, and that enables us to hit play and get all sorts of different looks traveling through the bar graph. So again, it's a tool that's designed to layer up, make different modes. Here we could say, hey, there should only be a smaller count. I want it to be a pie graph spinning around, and we can manipulate the noise, change it to different noise types. Let's do like a Luca, which is traveling faster. We can like set minimums and maximums, shift everything around. You can see I can add some horizontal variation here. Let me go back to a bar graph. So yeah, with this data, I can say, hey, it's horizontally being manipulated. You see, we can randomize those shapes that way. If we gave this 0 speed, this is like an instant little city. But you go back to it being a pie graph, and these all spin around. This entire thing could be, I think we can set the data. I haven't used the tool in a while, but yeah, there's different speeds. We could set a loop point. So this data here could be looping. And then there is,
looping is always an important one. There are so many things that need to be looped. So
yes,
I'm super excited about looping capabilities here.
Yeah, anywhere we can put looping stuff is super important. I'm gonna put the speed to 0, and
you can also open up because I think I did test this briefly before it was released. I think, can you open up the inner radius? Can we put a hole in it?
Yeah, I'm looking. Oh, there's the inner radius. Yeah. So we can push that out like that. You can also we can pivot it from the outside, from the inside. We don't have to show a full arc. Like we can wrap this data to only 180 degrees. I went crazy on this tool. Like I just kept on adding more and more settings. You can see now that the data is set to not animate, but instead it's traveling around in the circle. So yeah, this can layer and layer and layer. There's a bunch of pretty elaborate examples of this in the browser. So here and here and here, those are entire, like and this one and this one and that one. It's just like this graph, like layered and layered and layered on top of itself. So yeah, I like the way these look.
Those are all rendered with Redshift, right?
Yes, those are rendered with Redshift. I would pop them open, but like I said, I might freeze my computer right now if I'm also streaming. But yeah, let's see. We have to go. I can't spend too much time, so let's jump to the next tool. And
there were actually 2 quick questions on that.
Excellent.
So Hannah was wondering, as am I, does it work with the sound effector by any chance?
I don't know. No, I don't. That wouldn't work with sound effector because we can't tie any MoGraph stuff into here directly. We also, another common request would be the idea of being able to like import like a CSV file or some sort of spreadsheet, which is something that like as soon as we are able to do that properly, then it would be great to go back and implement that. But yeah, there's even more settings.
It would be
go ahead.
Possible somehow, but you have to do like a workaround with a sound effector and then controlling the position of another clone, and then I guess read the position to drive the other parameter with it.
I think
for remapping, something like that.
If
might
I feed
work.
that into if I feed this into a fracture, it's possible that we can, if we put it to a fracture and I throw a random, and let's tell the fracture to explode segments, does that see it? No, it doesn't seem to see it. And I don't know that there's any way to, parametric. Oh, no, there we go. So I put in a connect object. When in doubt, use a connect. So now it is seeing each individual part in a cloner. So, at that point, you could drive it. But if the data is changing, updating, if new pieces are being created, the result's not guaranteed. But, you could do some MoGraph by, like most things, throw it to a fracture, explode it apart into pieces, and then MoGraph can begin affecting it.
That's even much easier than what I thought of.
Nope.
So
excellent.
the connect should have been my first thought.
Yes, always. When in doubt, that's my rule. I want that on a t-shirt. When in doubt, use a connect object. Rodrigo was asking if you could put space between the bars. And there's a setting for that. Drag this in again. Let me make fewer. And we got rounding. Oh, here's the gap. So I can put a gap in between them. And I think, shift them to I can pivot from the bottom, pivot from the center point, like the way the noise, as you set it up, I could make this look like, have this travel faster. You can start getting something that looks like a waveform. We can add some speed on there. And now it's animating, and let me slow that down a bit. Now it's traveling along while changing. So, and this is all sort of fake, but you can get some cool effects from it. Let's slow down that animation speed. Luke is a noise. But they layer up really, really.
So I totally get the interest in wanting to associate the movement or length or whatever with audio files, but I feel like I don't know. Tell me if you think this is a accurate statement, but I feel like this, like if you want bars that are being driven by sound files, and you can do that with the traditional MoGraph tools and the sound effector. This is actually very different. This sort of is, this gives us a similar looking result, but like we wouldn't use this for, to simulate a sound wave.
Well, I this is all faking information. So if you want to just get some cool looking graphics going, that's kind of what I had in mind as I was designing it.
There it is. It's faking the information. Perfect.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
So just some cool random data. But even here, like if I, now that I have the modified data and I remapped it with some spline information, so now it's growing and scaling down. But if we switch that to a pie, you can see how that's actually pinching on one particular spot. Switch this to a line graph, and it's going to shoot up and then down. So change that to a step, and it's stepping up and down. All of these could be lofted or extruded, rendered with redshift. So
I swear, every time I'm messing with the settings, or I watch you mess with, and anyone messing with these settings, every time I see something that I haven't seen before. It's so cool.
Yeah, it goes to there's so many different combinations. It's hard for me to think of something besides real data. It's hard for me to think of something I'd want to do generically with a graph that this can't do. Like I said, I went crazy on this tool. I spent so much time on it. So that one's really fun. But with our limit of time, we really got to move on here. So Fui Ring, I'm going to go through this one really quickly. It's just the idea of this is supposed to pair with a different asset that was made by someone else. But it does similar things where you get this cool ring setup, and there's a lot of settings for spinning around, cropping out different shapes. So this is more, I think of this a little bit more as a modeling tool, but you can do some things like this automatic animation, change the plane. We can invert the result, combine them. But it's a simple way of, it's almost like a different archetype that we don't get in vanilla cinema. But that one works out well. We can turn out some rounding, round those out. So you can get some cool primitive shapes there. But yeah, I'm going to fly through that one really quickly. The next one that we made was this stair generator. Now, the stair generator, I know, definitely comes along with the Cinema 4D subscription. And here you're going to see that we can generate stairs. And this one's actually making geometry here. I can show the overall geometry. And we tried to make every type of generic type of stairs you could imagine needing. Let me pull this up. We've got the step count. I pivot from the back. I used to have to make stairs all the time in my job way back in the day. So I just know that it's like you always want your stairs pivoting from the back because that's where you stop. That's where they will end. So you want to drive them forward. But we have settings to offset that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
it's always good when people create these assets who really have experience in that field.
Yeah.
And you immediately notice that once you use the tool for the first time, you are like, hey, that's clever.
Yeah, it's like, okay, this person knows what they were talking about. They've done this before. But yeah, lots of controls you would expect. We've got the step thickness. We've got the riser. Ooh, let me do that slowly. The riser thickness. We've got the nose of it. That's actually, yeah, these are technically called the step nose. So I'll push it out a little bit extra forward.
I don't think we had that in our previous setup in the content browser. That's awesome.
We can extend them further, and these settings are unclamped, so you can push them extra far. And then we even have the step extend, so you can like force it backward further into there if you want them to kind of do this cool overlapping thing. We looked at lots of different photos of like stoops and steps and just trying to see what every possible way people might want to be using this. In addition, we've got 3 different fundamental types of looks, essentially. So you can do a solid type of step. Let me get rid of these. So here you can just be like, okay, it's the simplest possible set of stairs, always a single volume. And then we've got the stringer type of stairs where you want the planks on the top, but you could do the solid steps with the planks on top. And you see they even eat into the steps rather than pushing out. And then we've got, we got the none. So this will just be floating steps. And we've also got these wall stringers. So if I turn these on, you see you get, that'll look a little better on here. So you get these wall stringers, but we can set that to just the left or the right, and we can change the height and the width. You can even kind of add these to the idea of like a stoop here. Let's do both and extend.
By the way, we're getting a lot of questions on this.
Oh, but while you change a couple settings, you can see, okay, cool. That's a very different set of stairs there. And then we built in a bevel. So there's 2 bevels, actually. One bevel is for like that sharp part of step, the kind of important part. But then there's a secondary bevel, and this will just apply to everything else. So you can bevel them all as well. Yeah. What kind of questions do we have?
So Konami was actually, I think this is about the grid and the spline based presets. You want to know what happens if you put it into Volume Builder? I believe it'll just see it as a spline.
Yeah, that'll totally work. It will see it.
But let's see. Jeff is wondering what are the UVs? What the UVs are like?
We tried doing a little bit of stuff with the UVs here, and they weren't super cooperating. So what we chose to do instead was, for now, worry about things as selection tags. So internal to this tool, let me get rid of these stringers. Internal to this tool are selection tags. And if you make it editable, you can see that there's a bunch of selection tags we made. So we've got the standard ones like C1, C2, but then we've got custom ones that we made. Like here's, we got stringers, and then we've got the steps. So if I copy steps and I can undo, bring this back. And now I can say, hey, apply this material everywhere. And I'm going to drop that in and say, hey, but limit that to the steps. You can now see I was able to texture those separately. And if I set that to, I know this isn't a fancy texture on here. Let's throw in a checkerboard again, the most generic.
That's perfect, though. I mean, selections work just as good, especially with, like triplanar.
Yeah, triplanar, setting it to a simple cubic, like the old school method. Like I can, scale this projection however I want and kind of map them separately. So yeah, being able to map all the different parts and the caps and the top and the sides and the stringers. So that's the way we're currently working around it. So yeah, you can texture everything separately without making it editable. And then I think with the Max on One subscription, we do have this giant example where I made a whole bunch of different steps that I put a bend deformer in and spun them around, etc.
Oh, perfect. Because that was Abdul was wondering, can you use a deformer with that? Dominic wanted to know, can you do a spiral staircase? And you might have one in that example scene file.
Yeah, you have to do it carefully and cleanly, and I'm not going to open up the file because there's going to be a lot of Redshift material previews. But yeah, here you can see. I've got 2 different spiral examples where it's like, as long as you don't spiral too much and the geometry is decently even and you do it carefully. But yeah, I built a bunch of different examples, all covered with different materials that are also Redshift, and all those materials are included in the asset browser as well.
Saika says Escher would be very happy.
Especially when you put those crazy black and white checkerboard patterns on everything. Next up, we made the wave spline. So I'll drag that in. You can also drag it into the viewport. So the wave spline is, think of it sort of like the helix spline, but it is going to generate a whole bunch of different preset repeating shapes for you. So here's a sine wave, and we are able to, do the height, the width, and then we've got the frequency, how many times does a pattern appear, and then we've got the subdivision, which is how many points appear per subdivision. So we can put that up or down. So that could go way down, that could go way up. If you put your height to 0, you can make a straight line. In addition to that, you can align this on the bottom or top or the left or the right. Then we can set a period here, the loop. So we can say, hey, that's going to take, I'm going to go actually a little bit slower. I'm going to say it takes 90 frames. If I play, you can see it's going to start traveling along. And now the entire length will travel from the start to the end over the course of 90 frames. You can manually keyframe that. You can see we get this really nice loop going. But we've got a bunch of different types here. Cosine looks identical, just inverted. Triangle and sawtooth. We've got a crank shape, or I'm sorry, that's the up and the square. So nice straightforward up and down. And again, we could change the height. You can imagine like lots of different shapes you could build now parametrically by using this as the base of the rig. And you can change the ratio here so that it can be really tight or really tall. And then we have a crank, which essentially goes up, over, down, over, halfway up. And then we've got the different ratios to control how those combine. And then we've got a bounce, nice straightforward up and down, and noise based. This is, once again, it's all about looping things. So we're actually seeing 8 loops of the exact same noise. So this would be really good for something like a heart rate monitor. Let's make our width a little bit down. Yeah, heart rate monitor. We've got total randomness. So instead of it being based off of a noise, it's just total randomness, but that randomness is repeated based on whatever the frequency is. And finally, we've got custom where you could draw whichever shape you wanted. But for now, I'll jump back to, let's go back to the basic sine wave. But then we've also got this remapping spline. So I can actually grab this and say, hey, fade out as you go. Or we could say, hey, fade in and then out. So a way of also modifying this. You can draw that spline however you like. And I also have it so you can fade this as a multiplier. So it's like, oh, am I going to the center point? Or are we pushing down or up? So all of those would be different effects that I would definitely want to use.
That is super useful.
So yeah, just another primitive that it would be really useful for. Oh, I forgot we put this rounding in here. Yeah, just another tool that's really useful for building additional rigs. And I've often needed just a simple zigzag, just a triangle going up and down. And to build that parametrically in Cinema takes quite a bit of effort for finding like the proper repeating ratio, etc. So yeah, a really nice straightforward primitive to create all these different shapes. Now, I'll actually keep this shape up here so we can jump into talking about the next one. But I will stop this animation. So the month after that, and these will be the last 2 tools to talk about, is the dash spline and the trim spline. And both of these are spline specific, and they're both modifiers for splines. Now, if you have, I think the trim spline, that's with a Cinema 4D subscription, and the dash spline, which is a little bit more advanced, that one's for a Maxon 1 subscription. But if you have those, they're already on your computer. You already have these, which is the cool detail. But we'll begin with trim spline. So if I drag this over, this is another modifier. So I think right now we're treating it that orange are like modifiers or sort of like deformers. So you can think of this as a spline deformer. Trim spline, really straightforward. We drop it as a child, and now we can easily just say, hey, let me erase out parts of the spline. So I mean, what's funny is this is like the most trivial of things, but it's not easy to do in vanilla Cinema. Essentially, the only way that I specifically know how is you have to use a Mo spline, but in the Mo spline, you have to change like 3 different modes, link the spline in, and then control some parameters and stop them from overshooting. So here it's like, hey, let's just expose the simplest possible version of like, hey, I want to keyframe something growing into the scene. So there you go. Super simple trim, looking good.
Leo's wondering, where's the control for the speed?
Speed on what?
I think the wave.
The speed. Well, the speed was the period. That's the looping point. So that's again based on frames. So if you type in 90, it's going to travel left or right, positive or negative, over the course of 1 second. Or I'm sorry, well, over the course of 3 seconds now, because I typed in 90. That's how long it takes to go from like that left point all the way to the right. And there's, of course, the manual offset. So you can just keyframe this if you want it to go manually. Because anybody who's played around with the idea of a rate, so like in the cloner, if you're cloning out to a spline, there's a rate setting. But you can't really keyframe the rate. If you keyframe the rate, then it's like it's not frame dependent. So if you increase the speed, it backtracks and it updates everything. So if you increase 1%, it's like, well, you're increasing 1% additively every frame up to the current time. So that ends up being very unintuitive. So something I always try and build into Rocket Lasso tools and to all these capsules is the idea of a automatic looping animation, but a manual offset as well. So if you wanted it to go fast and then slow and then fast and then backward, you manually keyframe that.
So Sharon's asking, can you use a formula here to create the shape of the wave?
No, we did not do formula, but there is a formula spline, so I didn't see any reason in doing that. The formula spline is the equivalent, essentially. So yeah, no, we did not put a formula spline. I don't even know how that would work. I guess that probably would. Well, I don't know if we could do that in capsules. I'd have to think about that. I don't even know if it's possible because somebody'd have to type something. We have to like break apart the idea of what they typed into mathematical nodes, essentially. And I don't know if it's possible, but it very well might be. I guess it would depend if there's a formula node. Sorry, I start like try to build it in my head.
If someone figured it out, it would probably be you guys.
That would be dependent on if there was a formula node inside nodes, which there very well could be. But sorry, going back to the trim. So again, we've got this original spline, but we've got a simple, like what part of the percentage are we seeing? But I can say, actually, let's put a rate in there. So, how far along the path should it travel over the course of a second? So now you can see it traveling along. And yeah, again, a manual offset. So I could keyframe that forward or backward, and you get this nice looping animation. Then we've also got a length setting. So if I switch over to that, instead, essentially you can erase out from one side or the other. So it's a way of, and again, it's the trim spline. So we can now trim as I add in this variable. You can see it's now set to length, and I'm now trimming in from the left and from the right. But what could be useful here is I could say invert, and you're left with both the outer bits of that. So depending on your setup, that can go a long way for the setups and the rigs that you want to build. But I'll say that for me, even during my live streams, I'm reaching for trim pretty often because oftentimes you just have a spline and you just want to keyframe the line animating on. So it just makes it that this is like a daily driver type of thing. Like you're going to be constantly reaching for this tool just because I just want to see the first 50% of a spline. So it's a little bit simpler. But because this was a simpler tool to make, that month we actually made 2 tools. And the other tool that we made is the dash spline modifier. So if I drop this in, you'll instantly see that we get dotted lines on top of whatever spline that we're feeding in.
That's a massive time saver right there.
Yes.
Huge.
So yeah, really straightforward. We can set the length. So one thing to note is this is the length of the line and the subsequent gap. So there's 14 to account for those. And now we see as many of those as we want, or you say an exact count. So now there's exactly 50. We could say a percentage. So now every 5% of this line it will generate, depending on the rig you're building, depending on what you're doing. Each of these might be the relevant one. Something that's not unusual for me to do. I mean, these tools obviously start combining with each other. So if I grab our grid spline, I'll drag that in, set that to segment mode. So we're seeing every individual little line. Drop our, let me set this to a count of 5, drop it in as a child. And I can see that that is being subdivided as dotted grid. And then if I say, end snap, if I turn that on, then you see it'll actually balance itself out. We have an invert, so you can see the exact opposite result. So you can see we get these nice little crosshairs or little gaps in between, depending if I turn that on or off. We can manually offset these,
but you can't achieve that just with the grid alone, because the grid doesn't do dash
The
doesn't
grid
do it
itself
that
could
way.
not do that.
Yeah.
So yeah, so this is, it's now I love modifiers like this because you get just force multipliers on everything, where it's like, oh, grid has become more powerful because we now have the ability to add a dash on top of it. So yeah, really dig being able to layer things up like that. And
Action
then
Media is actually asking, how does the trim spline work with text splines?
Let's say dash spline center. So yeah, we can apply that to text. Again, I could set this to a length, which makes it an absolute value. So now everything's going to get a very even amount. Something that's important to note, I think most of the time people aren't even going to think about it, but right now, technically, these are all every segment's a slightly different length because we have a setting called snap. And what snap is doing is essentially snapping to the nearest whole number. If you turn off snap, then these will end up, now every dash is exactly the same size as every other dash, but that means you're going to end up with like some fraction of a dash somewhere where they're getting cut out. So where is the actual loop point here? Oh, okay. So up in this corner, that's where the actual loop point happens here. So you see, as I sneak through, like it can't quite fit them in all the way. Oh, and turn off end snap. That should show it a little bit better. So as these loop around, where's the actual loop point happening?
Dose Emotions wondering how that would play with rope. And
yeah, that's actually a really cool detail because the new simulation stuff is treated as a deformer. These modifiers can be applied after the fact. So two different thoughts there. One, let me make this length pretty big, and we'll make a sphere scale, and I'll just make that a big old collider, simulation collider. And if I throw a simulation rope tag onto all of these lines, let's see, if I hit play, let me hide the grid. Filter preset Chris. Okay, that hides everything. So if I hit play right now, then what we're going to see is all of these individual dash pieces individually falling, because that is the order of operations. We have said, hey, we have a text, we're going to deform it somehow. Now that we have a deformed piece of text, run the simulation. But if instead we say, hey, run the simulation, and we should probably subdivide this. I'll say subdivided, jump this to 90. So every 5 units, it's creating a subdivision. So we have a nice line. If I hit play right now, basic, spline, squish, you see these individual pieces of rope. But then if we feed that, I think we can do it with a null. Put that into a null. Oop, I dropped it wrong. So just like a regular Cinema 4D deformer, this is, well, let me see. I don't know for sure. Let me hit play. No, that is acting after the fact. So I think I need to put that into, if it works, put that into a connect object. And now that's going to see the result. And do I put that into the null?
I mean, the thing is, if you need them to stick together, you just set it up a little differently.
Yeah.
You wouldn't do rope.
There we go. Okay, yeah. So I just I don't even know if we need to put it in the connect, but you can see now that these dashed lines, if I hit play, instead of them all falling apart independently, you see how those are stuck together. So that is it's deforming after the simulation. So you can deform before the simulation or after the simulation, depending on the way you put your hierarchy together, just like any other deformer would be affecting your hierarchy.
Oh man.
So, and you could also be like running trim on there. We could run trim before dash, but after the simulation. So these could be falling while you're erasing out and dashing after the fact. So yeah, they all layer up in like really, really cool
These
ways.
capsules make me want to create like an animated knitted mesh. That's just like where my head's going as I'm watching it. And I'd just love to do that now.
Totally. I don't know. Hopefully it works. It's going to yell. If I suddenly disappear and freeze, then it's I shouldn't have done it. But I'm going to open up this, download this net, and we'll see if it works. Where I used the wave spline and I interwove them, and then I ran the rope simulations on them. And is it not downloading for me? There we go. So this might take, the redshift is going to be the thing that's slowing me down there. But if it does open, let me hit play. Yeah, there. So I was able to use the wave spline in combination with all of the new simulation. So here's all ropes and connectors. So I'm connecting it to a big box on the outside, and I'm able to actually make, that's an actual rope with actual interwoven parts all running like there in real time. So yeah, there's so many cool ways of layering these up. It's super nuts. And I love keeping these things parametric. You just see that there's a couple of wave splines inside of a cloner, and then there's a couple in another cloner, and those just layer up on top of each other.
So there are some people that are little having issues with their license, or they're not sure if they're experiencing a problem or if they just have the wrong license. So if let's see, let me just put in the chat the link to our support center on Maxon. Contact support if you're not sure, and they can help you out.
Yeah, I'm curious if that is a licensing issue, or maybe there's something, because we're kind of doing some new processes when it comes to these, so maybe they're not getting quite linked in, but that's something to get figured out one way or the other. So hopefully get that all working for everybody.
Yeah.
So yeah, are there any questions on these existing tools? Because after we're done talking about these, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the newest tool from Rocket Lasso, which is the new plugin that we're selling. I'd love to go through some of those, a couple quick examples, not take too much time. But to go along with that, we have a special 15% off discount code for anybody hanging out in the chat for the new Rocket Lasso tool.
Let's do it. Let's get into it.
Well, I will, but first let's see if there's any more questions here, because I want the lion's share of this to be all about these awesome capsules that people have in their asset browser. But while we give a couple minutes for any questions on any of those capsules, we'll wait a few minutes. But I'll just have some fun with the swirl.
I think we covered pretty much everything.
Yeah, if that's the case, we'll be able to move on.
There was a lot of praise as well in the chat.
Well, thanks, everybody. Man, swirl. I love swirl. Swirl's a lot of fun, but it almost goes to like every tool that we make. I like it a little bit more than even the one before. So I could be biased. Add some pull, add some more ridge height.
Oh, there's another one that I also find interesting. So when you use the trim on a spline and use the spline for pyro emission, will it work?
When you use the trim on a spline and for pyro, I think so. It's all about the order of operation. I haven't tested it. Oh wait, I think I might have tested it, and I think it did work. Because everything it's all order of operations. So I guess maybe it's a little dangerous to run. I haven't done a pyro in like 2 months because I haven't had any specific need to, because I've been focused on these tools. But let's try and do a very quick, simple setup. So here's a spline, adding in a simulation pyro.
Maybe reduce the number of points on there.
There's not that many points here. It's very reasonable. You see, it's not insane.
Okay.
But I should be able to hit just play on there. I haven't done this in a while. Yeah, so you get the fire from there. So, simple fire constantly getting emitted from it. If we rewind and I say trim, and let's keyframe it on, that seems more fun. So we'll have a little bit at the beginning, and then at the end, let's have this keyframed all the way on. Let's see if that updates. So you'll see it is seeing that, and yeah, look at that. It trims, and the fire is going to grow on with it. So the ability to layer these things again is where the power comes in.
Many ideas in my mind.
So you could probably be running a rope simulation on it, trimming that rope simulation while fire is spewing from the resulting spline as it swings and tears based on the rope simulation and the board falling through it. Like, yeah, the layers get super crazy. Yesterday during, for anybody watching who's hanging out in the chat who doesn't know, I'm in the beginning of season 5 of Rocket Lasso Live, and that is a live stream that I run every Wednesday at, what time is it, California? It's 2:00 in Central Time, so that would be 12, I guess, noon in LA and California. But I just take questions from everybody for 2 hours, like on YouTube and on Twitch. So if you follow Rocket Lasso on Twitch or on YouTube, you'll see the live alert come up. Or if you're on the Slack channel, Rocket Lasso Slack, you can join for free. I always put a big announcement in the live chat that I'm going live, and I just answer questions the entire time. And yesterday was one of the exciting ones because we were able to make a folding simulation for the first time ever. I've gotten that question every year all the time where people want to fold origami or fold a napkin, just fold cloth. And it took a while, but then we figured out a very simple technique for like folding again, and it looks amazing, super controllable, super art directable, easy to run. I'll be probably making a full tutorial on it soon, but we just kind of came across the technique yesterday. So so many new things to find and discover. Very exciting.
We are looking forward to that tutorial.
We everybody stay with us. We're not going anywhere, but we have to say bye to Ellie. She has to run.
Bye. This was so fun. I was going to just kind of like sneak away quietly, but
no, I can't let you do that.
No, clearly not. Lucky I didn't hit remove, but I want to say thanks to Chris because I'm going to jump off now. It's so cool seeing the stuff that you and your brother have created, and also for everyone to see these capsules who perhaps haven't seen them before. And I now have about 100 ideas for things I want to play with now. So thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
But yeah, I'll see you
everyone
all soon.
Stay with us. We're not going anywhere.
And yeah, like I mentioned, like these are essentially getting released every month. That's what we're aiming for, is every month a new capsule comes out. And that's in addition to like new materials and HDRs and models and stuff that's coming out in the assets browser. And I would love to be somebody who's got a Max on One subscription and then be like, wait a minute, I didn't know I had those. And suddenly they got all these cool new tools that they didn't even know, and they're already on their computer.
That happens to me every month. Like I didn't even know this roll was coming, and I saw that, and it's like, it's like Hanukkah every month.
Awesome. Well, if anybody has any more questions, I totally want to answer any questions involving any of these, but I would love to do a quick demo of a couple of the tools that we just came out with at Rocket Lasso. And they are all about the new utility splines. So it's 5 plugins in one. And like I said, we've got a discount code for anybody here in the chat. If you use the code Ask the Trainer, all one word, and I think there'll be a link in the chat. You can pick it up for 15% off, which is the best deal you can get right now. So let me pop open. I prepared a couple example files here. So let me pop this open.
Is there like an expiration on that code? Like, is that for the next hour or today?
I'll leave it up for a couple of days for anybody who wants it. But you should grab it soon, because I did put I put a limit on there just in case the code escapes out into the world, which people are usually really good about not doing that. But yeah, I'll keep it up for a few days before I get rid of it. But it's only for people here in the chat. Shh, secret code. Anyway, let's talk about some of the super duper basics of this new tool. So I've done some of these demos. If you've seen them before, apologies. But let's say that this is it's a spline, but let's say that this is something that you imported. We have like a traced camera path or something, and you get this big old messy line in there, and you're like, oh, it's so jittery. Like I can't work from this. Well, if you have the Rocket utility spines, you can go to your extensions, and we got this flyout, and here's our 5 different tools. So the first one I'll show is the smoothing tool. Creating that, you drop any splines you want in as a child of that, and instantly you're going to see that I can pull this one setting, change the number of iterations, and we can start smoothing out that line parametrically. We are returning a spline after having smoothed it. We got a couple of cool settings here. Let me make a duplicate of the camera track. So you see I've got the original, and I've got this one that I'm modifying. And you see it's going to be following that path really well. But just as a natural consequence of smoothing something, it always gets smaller. So we didn't want that. So we made a setting called counter scale. So what counter scale is going to do is push all of those lines in their smoothed out form back to the approximation of where they used to be. So now you can see I'm actually not deviating very far from the path that I used to be on. So yeah, being able to maintain that original shape goes a really long way.
Yeah, I did exactly this with my ricochet splines.
Yes, that's definitely something that we do, is our tools pair with each other really well. So we've also got, for anybody to chat, you're probably familiar if you know my stuff at all, but we've also got our plugin Ricochet, we've got our plugin slicer, we've got our plugin mesh to spline, and all of those are generating brand new splines in really cool parametric ways. So the ability to take those splines, clean them up, modify them, transform them in different ways goes a really long way. So that's just one simple example of smoothing. We could do that on anything, but we'll come back to that a little bit more later. For now, I'm going to open up this super crazy detailed. What did I? Oh, it looks super crazy. The world looks really weird backwards. Look at that. It's like unrecognizable. But anyway, we've got the spline. It's really complicated. If I select these points, you're going to see that it's a really nice detailed map. We're actually using this file as one of our primary testing tools just because it feels like a really practical real world scenario. So let's zoom up. Where do we want to go? Let's go over here to the Gulf region. And I will say, okay, what do we want to do this time? Well, it's like, well, we have so many points. There are a lot of points involved in here. So let's say that I want to reduce my point count. So I could say I want a rocket reduction. So I'll hold down Alt as I create it. So it becomes a child instantly. And we've got 4 different algorithms, 4 completely different algorithms for removing points from this. So if I click on my advanced tab, we can get some extra information. The original spline has 56,000 points. And currently I'm reducing it down to only about 16%. So we're down to just under 9,000 of the original points. So that's just the default, but that is our deviation mode. I love deviation mode, but before we get there, I should mention a different tool that we have, and that is these tick marks. If I turn on these tick marks, we can see a little dash where every point is. So it's a way of getting feedback on that. But yeah, it's super duper useful. But what my favorite thing about this is I love adding in double click functionality into icons because it means you don't have to go hunting through your settings. So if you're working on your spline here, you don't even have your tool selected. I can double click on the icon of Ricochet, or I'm sorry, Rocket Reduction, and you'll see it'll instantly show those tick marks. If I double click, it turns them off. So I can turn it on, turn it off just with a double click of the icon.
I gotta say, Chris, that sort of brought me back to like 2004 Cinema 4D. You know, like old school Cinema 4D, like when there used to be a time when you had to double click on an icon to get to something's parameters.
Oh yeah.
The physical sky has a physical sky manager. You can only get to double clicking, and no one's been using it or having fun with it. And I'm so glad that you did that.
Yeah, I think all of our tools end up having double click functionality one way or the other, because it's never like exclusive to that. It's like, oh, it's a quicker way of doing the most common thing you need to do. So in this case, there's a manual setting. This is just setting it for you. But anyway, you can turn it on, turn it off. But what I want to talk about is this deviation mode. If I put my tolerance down to 0, you're going to see it's got all of our original points. But what we can do now is say, hey, we're going to start removing points. And if removing that point makes it so that your line is deviating more than that amount, then it can't remove that point. So I can now, in a very, very clean and interactive way, be like, hey, if anything moves more than, or if anything's under 0.1, then go ahead and remove it. So you see a whole bunch of points disappeared there. If I go to advanced, you can see that I've now removed almost 20% of the points. But let me double click and show you here. If I say deviation of 0, there's all the points. So I can say do a deviation of 0.1. I don't see a visual difference like at all switching between those. If I turn this on and off, like I don't see a difference, but we've gotten rid of 20% of the points. Let's jump this to 0.25. And let me see, I'll turn that on and off. I still am not seeing a difference there. And now we've gotten rid of 50% of the points. So all of those points were essentially redundant. They're doing so little that it's zoomed out this much, we wouldn't even see those. But we keep on pushing that further and further, jump this to 0.5, and we might, now we finally see a little bit of a change, but now we've gotten rid of, about 70% of the points. So we keep pushing that further and further, and I can keep on increasing that number until we start obliterating like every single part of the entire, the entire setup. But you can still recognizably see it as the world. So I love deviation mode. But we've also got things like this angle reduction. So I can remove anything underneath a particular angle. And we can see that has removed about 25% of them. Actually, that makes sense. No, that does make sense. It's coincidence. We can click optimize. And optimize is going to, let me double click here and zoom up. Optimize will only work from existing points, but we can say, hey, remove anything that's closer than 1. So I can say, hey, remove anything that's closer than 5. So you see it's going to step from 1 point, get rid of anything that's closer than 5, and then go to the next one that's far enough away and find them all that way. So a very even distribution of the points there. And then we can straight up say, hey, remove a certain percentage of them. And it's always going to remove the most shallow angles. So if I say remove 25%, we have removed 25% of the points. So that's one tool for removing points.
Wow.
We also got a resample tool. Now, why don't we?
I gotta ask you real quick: were there more options to add or remove points that you decided, you know what, I think we have enough at this point, and like you didn't implement them?
I am trying to think if there were. I mean, it's kind of,
because it feels like you covered every base.
I was going to say, can you even think of another way of removing
I
points?
can't.
Because I think we added everyone that we could think of. And I mean, all of them are great because there's so few settings on any of them. So it's not like a user has to overthink it. It's like, oh my God, there's so many settings. It's like, no, which mode are you in? And then the single variable. Something I didn't open up a demo for it. I've got a little bit of time here. And if anybody has any questions, like please throw them in. I'm going to try and make a file from scratch. And this is just one of my favorite demos. And there's a couple cool cinema tricks in here as well. I shall make a text object with some geometry. And I'll just type in RKT for some of these rocket tools.
Thank you for that comment. Can you see that, Chris?
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Justin.
That's really sweet, man.
Let's see. I'm going to select, I just want a beefier font. So I'm going to search for Futura. Wait a minute. Okay. I'm not finding that one. So I'm going to search for lemon milk. Lemon milk bold. Put a little depth on there. Feed this into, actually, here's what I'll do. I guess I just want a volume. So maybe I don't need to do that step. Yeah. I'll feed this into a volume builder, into a volume mesher. And then inside the volume builder, make a dilate and erode, which is a good way of kind of inflating things. I'm going to inflate all that text. And my goal there was to make these so they slightly blobbed into each other. So now I've got this bit of text. Using a completely different tool from Rocket Lasso, I'm going to fill up this object. So here is Ricochet. And I really love Ricochet. It's kind of a concept I've never seen anywhere else. The elevator pitch is it's kind of like a particle system with no particles. So the basic idea is with Ricochet, and I'm going to remote link into it. I'm going to say, hey, what objects do I want to look at? I want to look at this volume mesher. So what is happening, and now I shall hide the source, you're going to see that I've got essentially a laser, and it's bouncing as it hits the geometry. So you see it's bouncing, 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 bouncing off the walls. So I can start cranking up this amount, and because they're all connected, you see it's going to start bouncing into the different letters. So here's what's cool, and is that Ricochet is really fast. I can say, okay, that's bouncing, but let's add more bounces. And it's like, okay, well, that's quite a bit of spline there. There's a lot of lines, but I'm going to add another 0 onto there. And now look how quick that was to calculate. And this is now stuffed full of splines, like so much so that we can't even see them anymore. And it just is running that quickly. So love this tool.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. When you first released this, I couldn't fucking believe it. It's so fast. And I was on a really lame laptop, and I was just cranking out all of just awesome.
And we have so many settings here. Like this is just bouncing off everything. Like it's a perfect mirror. But you say, actually take on the alignment of the surface. And you can now see that these lines are going to look a little bit more like they're wrapping around like the outside of it because they're trying to follow the surface. And there's a lot more settings there. But we'll leave this totally random, bouncing around. And it's actually doing a nice job of evenly bouncing, which is kind of just coincidence. We could go to different seeds and you'll see it just bouncing a completely different pattern. But I like this layout. So, okay, cool. Let's start running some simulation on here. But when you're running a simulation, you want everything to be a very even point count. So if I take this, and I could make this editable, so you can just imagine this is a spline that you traced from a particle bouncing around. So you could build something like this. It would take a while, but you can imagine how you might make a spline from that. But what I'd like to do is feed this Ricochet into a resample. So another tool that we made is this resample, where I could say exactly what the point count is going to be. So instead of reducing points, I could say, hey, here's a step of 5. So every 5 units create a new point. I'll actually increase that up to say 3. So you can see I get a bunch of points here, perfectly evenly subdivided around the entire thing. So now that that's working, I can feed this into a simulation rope. So I shall turn gravity off, Control D, and say simulation scene 0.
I'm scared. I'm like scared right now.
Well, you never know, but let's hit play to see what happens, because now we've got a whole bunch of these lines, and yeah, there we go, running really quick. And you see that those are now trying to not collide with each other. Something that's not a bad idea, especially if you don't want things to fly away, because what I want to do is increase my radius. So I can say 2. And now these are probably increasing the radius means they're going to be intersecting each other more, which means they're going to want to fly apart more. And it might take a little bit to calculate that initial frame because there's a lot of intersections, but I feel pretty confident. Yeah, hit play. It's all super tangled up, so they didn't fly too far apart. And you can see we get this lovely simulation going where they're all just kind of flying around doing their thing. So yeah, right there, that's working great. If you want to push it even further, I think we could probably, in our volume measure, let's make that into a collider. So I'll do simulation collider, and I'm going to say collide with the backside of that geometry. So again, this is just straight up rope simulation stuff. So now we're saying, okay, keep that line trapped inside. If I hit play, then now you can see all those lines trapped inside there pretty much perfectly, looking great. So, okay, working great. That gave us a perfect resample, but let's now take the result and sweep that. So I'm going to say, okay, I want to sweep, and I want to feed that through with an end side. The end side should be a radius of 2, and let's jump that to 12. So we get some subdivisions, and let's hide that original geometry. So now you can see, okay, cool, that's looking great. You can see this very nice even subdivision. Everything's looking perfect. And the simulation, you saw the simulation running super quick. Everything's working perfectly there. So like, what more could you want? Well, one thing you might want is we're ending up with like some pretty sharp corners here. And now a good way of getting around those sharp corners would be, subdivide it more, tell it can't bend very much, and maybe those wouldn't happen. But what if you want your simulation to still run really quick, but you want those to get smoothed out? Well, let's bring back in some more of those tools. Hopefully this will work where I've got ricochet, getting resampled, getting a simulation done on it. But now I'm going to say, take that resulting simulation and feed it into a smooth. So now I am smoothing the resulting simulation. So that's the order of operations happening. My favorite technique here is I can pull back on this. So you can see that's the original shape. If I add in a couple layers of smoothing here, yeah, it's going to do a great job of smoothing that out. And I'll actually exaggerate it here. If I keep pushing it kind of too far, it's smoothing out. Everything shrinks. Now, obviously, we could counter scale, but that might introduce some jitter in an animation. But you see, like, some of these pipes will start straight up intersecting each other. So the technique I like doing here is we got the resample, which we are using, but I also built resample directly into smooth because it's so common to use it. So we got a bunch of different resample modes. We didn't really talk about all of them. Like in this resample, we can do a step, we could do count, we could do random step, we can randomly subdivide. But inside of smooth, I'm going to say I would like to just do an extra subdivision. So right now I'm doing one extra subdivision. So essentially in between every point, I put a new point. We could even push it further, say, hey, in between each of those points, put another one. So it's times 2 that we just did. And now that we've put extra subdivisions in there and we've actually exceeded our point count, so I can say it's a lot, but it's not too many. So I say override.
Okay, I just got to ask you real quick. So where would I go so that I could just add the points where there's an angle greater than?
Actually, well, I'll show you. I'll show you that in a second, actually. Okay. So if we continue here on this thought, so I've subdivided a whole bunch, but because I've got extra subdivisions, that means I'm free to start adding in these extra layers of smoothing. So now you can see I smoothed out that corner, and we can even smooth that again and again. Where look, a beautiful smooth line there, but look, these aren't intersecting each other anymore because we added extra geometry, smoothed that out, and now we don't have that crazy sharp corner shooting out into nowhere. Is now a nice smooth rounded corner running after the simulation did. So look at this resulting spline. Like imagine, I mean, cinema could handle it, but it would run pretty slow to have this many points in your simulation. And now we're able to get this as the final result.
I wanted something like this forever.
Oh, there it is. Yep.
Yeah, I'm looking at Jonas's face, and he's like, I can see he just can't wait. He can't wait to get out of here and start messing with it.
Absolutely.
Yes. So yeah. So I love this workflow. So Darren, taking this a step further, if you wanted to, it depends on your setup. If this would be making your final, say, render run faster or slower, but I could now take this resulting geometry and be like, okay, that's great. It's smooth, but you know what? There's probably a bunch of spots here where there's a bunch of straight lines going, and that means there's extra geometry there that we don't need anymore. So now we can take the subdivided and smoothed outline, feed that into a reduction. And now I'll say override again and say, what tolerance do I want? I'll leave it pretty small again, say 0.1. So with 0.1, you can now see that areas that are very curved end up keeping their extra points, but the straight areas it removes the extra points, because to the eye, you wouldn't be able to see those points being there. So I've now reduced it, but now look, we get that smooth curve, but I've reduced the points back down again. So potentially, depending if your setup is going to run quicker, if you have fewer polygons, now we have fewer polygons. If I go to advanced, you can see that I went and took 133,000 points and dropped them down to about 40,000. So we removed more than 70% of the points, and it doesn't look very different, but we still have those smoothed out corners. And we can type in any number we want here. I could say 0.05, bring a bunch more of those back. It's going to look smoother overall, but even 0.05 is still reducing. It's getting rid of almost 60% of the overall points, which effectively weren't doing anything to help the final render. And there's layer, and you end up with this final result. So yeah, and there's more tools. I can't even, we didn't have time to go through them. There's also included is the cleanup tool, which helps.
We are already speechless, Chris. What more do you want?
Yeah, that helps remove extra points that aren't doing anything, and overlapping points that are perfectly on top of each other, and tiny segments that aren't needed. And then I don't have time to demo it because I have a hard out in like 5 minutes, like hard out. Yeah. But I'll open up this final file here if it's working. Let me turn off all of the final volume stuff.
So we do have Rocket Lasso, the URL, and the discount code crawling along the bottom of the screen. FYI.
Excellent. Oh, thank you. It's not 50% off. It's 15% off. Apologies.
Oh, my bad. I'm fixing that right now.
But yeah, 15% off if you use Ask the Trainer for anybody here in this chat. Okay, anyway, I want to walk through this very, very quickly. We'll just step through it without me building it. So this is a workflow I do pretty often. I find a cool image, I bring it to Photoshop, and I grab a selection, select everything I want, and say convert selection to paths. I then export that to Illustrator, which I can now open in Cinema. So here is that spline that I've brought in. So it's a big mess. Extruding this is going to be a big mess. You can see we've got all these jagged edges. It's almost tracing every single pixel. What I want to do is clean this up. So what I do is put this into a reduction, which we talked about, set to optimize. And you can see that, let me double click. You can see that is showing that there's now fewer points. And then I feed that into a deviation, which is removing more of the points. Put that into a resample to subdivide it more evenly. And then we can put that into a tool we haven't talked about, and that is this Bezier tool. And if I feed it into Rocket Bezier, what that's going to do, and I'll select that, you can see it looks very different. What this is showing is it's tried to convert this very complex spline, which I just cleaned up a little bit. It's trying to convert it back into a Bezier spline. So there's a couple settings in here. We don't have time to go over them, but the big one is tolerance. We're going to say, like, what tolerance do we have for deviation? So I'm going to say, hey, if I go up to like 5, that's like a lot of deviation. You can see that we've got very few handles now, but we lose a little bit of our detail. If we want decent fidelity in the setup, 1.5 seemed pretty good. And you can now see that if I make that Rocket Bezier editable, I can go to my point mode, and now I have reduced this back to Bezier handles that are going to be very clean and easy for me to manipulate the overall shape and make this actually look the way I want it to. Imagine going back and working from, like, here's our two different ones. You can see that they are matching each other very well, but imagine trying to clean this up and manually draw. Like, the client's like, oh, I want to like have the mirror be a little bit taller, a little bit wider. Like, trying to work from these points would be a nightmare. But now we clean it up and we end up
amazing.
Lovely.
Sandro saying that how unique this is, and hasn't seen anything like it. And I have to agree and add, there have been so many times where I've needed exactly this. And I haven't had it until now.
Thanks, man. Yeah, and thank you very much, Sandra. Just as a super final quick example, if we go back to that original thing with that camera spline, let's say we need to manipulate this, and it's like, oh, the camera should be over here, it should be over there, these perfect spots. Well, let's take that, feed that back into a smooth it out, counter scale it, feed that resulting clean spline into a Bezier, and now double click. I can see where my handles are, and we can make those larger if we want to see the dots a little bit better. And choose my deviation, and I can push this pretty far, I think. And now you can see I've taken that entire complex spline, all of these different points. Let me select it again. All of those different points make my Bezier editable. And now look what we've reduced it to, like just a handful of control points that we can very cleanly manipulate that final spline.
So we are getting so close to the middle of the hour, and I know you have a crazy day today, and you got to run soon. Is there anything else that we want to make sure that we get to?
If there's any other questions for anybody, from anybody, we have time to maybe answer them audibly one time. But yeah, I do have to go.
Just to be clear, the discount code is for Rocket Utility Splines.
Yes, Rocket Utility Splines.
Exclusively, yeah.
Here's another example. Here I'm using our other plugin, which is Mesh to Spline. And I'm taking this fancy car model. This car model is actually in the assets browser. And I am able to outline parts of it as splines. So parametrically converting all of these into splines.
I have spent hours doing that manually. Hours of my life.
Yeah,
I'm not kidding.
The Mesh to Spline can do outlines, it can convert edges, it can do silhouettes, it does a lot. But I can actually feed all of those parametrically as children into a smooth. And the smooth, I'm doing the same thing where I'm subdividing it twice. So parametrically, I took a low poly car, feed all of these splines in, turn on my smooth, and now I can get these resulting smooth curves, and it's even maintaining the color of all the individual segments.
So we are getting some questions. I think we should probably wrap up because we could stay with you for a couple more hours and then bring you back tomorrow and the day after. So please come back.
Absolutely.
We definitely want you to come back. You don't have to release something. We love having you. Yeah, Jonas, do you want to do the closing housekeeping, or shall I?
I can take care of that. Yes.
Awesome.
A second.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Oh yeah, no, thank you so much for having me on. I was excited to show everybody the capsules because we've been working really hard on them. I want everybody who has them to be able to start playing with them. Like
and it's really like you can see that you know what you're doing with your team, and I cannot think of anything you didn't think of. So it's really amazing. It's really amazing.
Well, if you ever think of something, let me know.
Cool. So let me take the screen here. There we go. Yeah. Well, we're wrapping up. So here's a little bit of housekeeping. So if you want to go and see which events we're doing, you can see that on the Maxon website. If you go to news and events. Oh, that's the German one. Here we go. News and events. And yeah, here you can see all the upcoming live streams that we are doing. If you missed one of these or multiple of these, you can always go to the Maxon Training Team YouTube channel. And look, we have a running live stream at the moment. It says with Chris Schmidt. That's awesome. Yeah, and you can see all the recordings here on this one. So there is a special Ask the Trainer playlist. I think I just got it. Here we go. That's the Ask the Trainer playlist, and the video or the recording of this session will be available in there. And if you want more tutorials, then go to cineversity.maxon.net. That's the new Cineversity with Getting Started series for all of our products, for all of our applications. So that's quite an exciting one. And last but not least, here again is the merch store that you can. Are you sharing links, Darren? Or oops.
Oh no, you got it. I'm just going to put the URL in the chat. What's the code again?
Well, I got it. It's Universe for Editors, all capitalized.
That one's all capitalized.
Yes. And that's pretty much it. Let's see who's faster. Okay, I wrote it in the chat. Very good. Okay,
go. Chris has to run. Thank you again so much, man.
Thank you for having me. This was fun. I have to do it more often.
Yes, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Please come back, and we're looking forward to the day you're coming back.
Okay. See
All
everybody
right.
in the future and then my live
Joining
streams.
us, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.